When you think of gold, what comes to mind? Probably jewelry, right? Maybe some old coins. But what if I told you that this ancient metal is making a massive comeback on the world stage, not just as money, but as a weapon? We need to talk about this, because what's happening with gold right now isn't just some boring financial trend. No, it's a huge signal that deep cracks are forming in the global order. Just look at this. Central banks, we're talking the financial hearts of entire nations, are buying up gold at a speed we haven't seen in over half a century. That surge you see after 2020, it's absolutely staggering. This isn't just a blip on the radar. This looks like a coordinated shift away from the financial system that we've all known for decades. And that, of course, raises the big question. Why? Why gold, and why now? Well, to really understand today's gold rush, we've actually got to look back. Because, as you'll see, the story of gold has always been tangled up with the story of money, power, and war. Okay, so first up, gold's modern comeback. Let's dig into who's actually leading this charge, because the list of buyers, well, it tells a really fascinating story about the world today. And it's a really interesting mix of countries, isn't it? On one side, you've got these major powers like China, India, and Turkey, who are all very openly trying to rely less on the US dollar. But then, on the other side, you have European nations like Poland and Hungary, countries that are right on the front lines of new global tensions. So it's a pretty diverse group, but they're all looking for the exact same thing: security in gold. So again, why gold? To get that answer, we need to hop in the time machine. You see, the link between a country's bank account and its military goes back centuries. In fact, it turns out that financing wars is the very reason modern central banking was even invented. And you can see this pattern all through history. The world's first big central banks? They weren't created to manage inflation or stabilize the economy. Nope, they were war chests. The Bank of England, founded way back in 1694, had one main job: get money to fight the war against France. Over a century later, Napoleon does the same thing, creating his own bank for the exact same reason: to build credibility for his military campaigns. From the very beginning, war was just baked into the DNA of high finance. And here is the absolute key to all of this. Gold wasn't just for paying soldiers. It was the ultimate security blanket. Think about it. In the middle of a war, if you need to borrow a ton of money to fund your army, your lenders have to believe you're good for it. And nothing, I mean nothing, screamed, "You can trust us," like a massive, state-owned vault overflowing with gold. It was the bedrock of a nation's credibility. Now, this all came to a boiling point in the 1930s. As the world was spiraling toward another global conflict, countries had to make a really tough choice about gold. And that choice basically split the world into two camps, each with a totally different strategy for survival. On one side, you had the UK and the US. They chose to focus on their economies. They actually abandoned the gold standard so they could print more money to save their banks and fight off the Great Depression. But then you had countries like France, Poland, and Belgium. As next-door neighbors to a rapidly rearming Nazi Germany, their priorities were, well, a little different. For them, gold wasn't an economic tool. It was a weapon of national defense, something to be stockpiled in heavily fortified vaults. And you don't have to take my word for it. This quote from the head of Poland's central bank back then says it all. In peacetime, gold is about currency stability, right? But as soon as those war clouds start to gather, its entire purpose shifts. It becomes a strategic asset, with one job and one job only: defending the state. Then, after World War II, everything changed. For decades, that old logic of gold as a war chest just kind of faded away. The world entered a totally new era, one built not on bars of gold, but on the US dollar. This was called the Bretton Woods system, set up in 1944. And it was actually pretty simple. Every other major currency was pegged to the US dollar at a fixed rate, and the dollar itself was pegged to gold. For all intents and purposes, the dollar was as good as gold. So under this new world order, this period of relative peace, holding US dollars just felt safe. For a lot of countries, that old urgent need to hoard their own gold as a war chest, it just wasn't there anymore. The dollar, backed by the full economic and military might of the United States, did the job for them. But that whole system came to a screeching halt. In 1971, the U.S. was facing huge costs from the Vietnam War and a ballooning trade deficit. So President Nixon went on TV and made a truly stunning announcement. He closed the gold window, which meant the U.S. would no longer convert dollars to gold.
Just like that, the final link was severed. The gold standard was officially dead. So hold on. If the gold standard died in 1971, what on earth brought it back? What's driving that massive buying spree we saw at the beginning? Well, the answer lies in a series of crises in the 21st century that completely shook the world's faith in the system that came next.
It really boils down to three things. First, the 2008 financial crisis just shattered people's confidence in the dollar-based system. Second, we had years and years of near-zero interest rates, which made holding gold, which doesn't pay you any interest, a lot less painful. But the third reason, and this is the real kicker, was rising geopolitical tension. It brought that old 19th century wartime logic roaring back. In a shaky, unstable world, nations started craving the security of a real, physical asset again. And this brings us right back to where we started. Remember Poland in the 1930s clinging to its gold for defense? Well, get this. Between 2018 and 2019 alone, Poland bought over 125 tons of gold. They more than doubled their entire reserves in one massive strategic move. And just listen to how the current head of Poland's central bank explains it. He's not talking about market returns or currency trades. He uses the exact same word, the same logic from a century ago. Gold makes the country more credible. Sound familiar? In a world full of uncertainty, credibility is everything. So what's the big takeaway here? Throughout history, gold has been like a barometer of fear. Nations start hoarding it when their faith in alliances, in treaties, in the global system itself starts to crumble. The fact that so many countries are suddenly running back to this ancient metal isn't just a financial story. It might just be the clear signal we have that we are heading into a much more fractured and much more unpredictable new era.